She was swallowing broken glass. Something deep in her chest shifted with every move, an ache too sharp to ignore. She knew what it meant. Her ribs weren't just bruised, they were broken. "My ribs are already broken," she whispered into the empty cabin air. Her voice was so faint it stirred nothing but the dust motes that drifted lazily in a shaft of light through the cracked window. Outside, boots thudded across the porch boards. That sound had once meant safety long ago, back when Jeremiah was her big brother who kept away shadows at night. But those days had vanished when whiskey took hold of him. After their pa died, Jeremiah's anger became the only constant in their home. The boots stopped. Clara froze, holding her breath, praying he would walk away, that maybe tonight he'd forget. Sometimes he did. Sometimes the storm passed, leaving him quiet, even sorry. But not today. The door scraped open. Clara didn't move. She'd learned the hard way that looking at him when he was like this only fueled the fire. Better to be still. Better to be small. Look at me when I'm talking to you. She hadn't even heard him cross the room. His words jolted her awake from the gray fog of pain. Clara forced her eyes up, and the first thing she saw were his boots, leather cracked and stained dark. Then his hands, knuckles raw, split from whatever he'd been hitting before he came for her. Finally, his eyes. Pale blue, once like their mother's, now cold and flat. "You think you're too good for the work I give you," he said, his voice low and steady. Shouting would have been better. His quiet voice was always worse. That quiet meant something colder than anger had settled in him. Clara wanted to answer, to say no, to remind him how she cooked and scrubbed and mended without complaint, but words failed her. "Pa always said you had too much of Ma in you," Jeremiah muttered, circling her like a predator. "Said it would make you soft." Guess he was right. The mention of their parents stung worse than any blow. Their pa had been strict but fair, and Mama had been gentle until sickness stole her away. Neither of them would have recognized the man Jeremiah had become. "Get up!" quote. Clara pressed her palms against the floorboards, tried to rise, but the fire in her ribs flared white-hot, and she collapsed back with a gasp that turned into a sob. I said, "Get up!" This time his boot caught her shoulder, not enough to break her further, but enough to fling her against the wall. She curled there, shaking as something fragile inside her gave way. Not just ribs this time. Something deeper, something that had clung to the hope he might still change. That tiny piece of her died right there on the cabin floor. "You can't do anything right," Jeremiah spat, his voice dripping with disgust. Clara stayed quiet, staring at the light shifting on the opposite wall. Time crawled. Soon it would be dark, and he would drink himself to sleep, leaving her a few hours of quiet before the sun rose, and the cycle began again. But lying there against the wall, Clara felt something new flicker inside her chest. It wasn't peace. It wasn't hope, not fully. But it was close. A whisper that maybe there was more than this cabin, more than Jeremiah's rage, more than pain dressed as family duty. Maybe there were people in the world who used their hands to protect, not hurt. Maybe there were places where breathing didn't come at the cost of bruises. The thought was dangerous. She pushed it away, but it didn't vanish. It settled inside her, small but stubborn. That night, while Jeremiah snored in the back room, Clara rose slow and careful. Every movement sent a sharp stab through her ribs, but she had long since learned to move through pain like water slipping past rocks. Her bare feet found the floorboards that didn't creak, the path she had memorized over years of silent nights. The door stood ahead of her like a challenge. She'd stared at it 1,000 times, but never with the thought of walking through it and not returning. Her hand closed around the iron latch. Cold bit her palm, but she didn't let go. Behind her, Jeremiah's snores rumbled, deep and steady. He wouldn't wake for hours, not after a night like this. The latch lifted with a soft click. The door opened. Morning air struck her face, sharp and clean, so different from the stale cabin air that it made her dizzy. Above her, The sky stretched endless and wide, too big to take in all at once. The porch boards felt strange beneath her feet. Yesterday morning she'd swept them, back when she still thought she could endure another day. Now each step carried her away from the girl she had been and closer to something unknown. At the edge of the porch, Clara turned. The cabin looked smaller from outside, meaner somehow, just a scar in the earth. She didn't look back again. The dirt road stretched pale and dusty toward the woods. Clara had walked it before, but only as far as the creek or the trees. Never beyond. Every step sent fire up her side, but she kept moving. By midday, the sun scorched her shoulders, her torn dress sticking with sweat. Her bare feet cracked and bled on the rough ground. She stumbled often, each fall harder to recover from, but still she walked. Fear drove her as much as hope. Any sound, a bird, a branch breaking, made her heart pound with the thought that Jeremiah might already be on her trail. She knew him well. He would not let her go without a fight. Late afternoon, Clara collapsed by a boulder, her back pressed against its warm surface. Her water was gone, her throat lined with dust. The land around her grew wild, empty of fences, empty of people. Maybe this was how it ended. Maybe she'd gone far enough to die free, under a sky too big for Jeremiah to cage. But then came the hoofbeats. At first, she thought it was her heartbeat, hammering too loud in her chest. But the sound grew clearer. A horse galloping, closing fast. Panic flared. Clara tried to stand, tried to flee, but her body had nothing left to give. She dragged herself a few feet into the shadow of a scrub pine, hoping to vanish into stillness. The hoofbeats slowed, stopped. "Easy now, Ranger, easy," a man's voice said, low and steady. Clara froze. Boots hit the dirt, moving closer. His voice carried no threat, only care. "Are you hurt?" Clara kept her eyes shut, hoping he'd leave, but his presence was near, undeniable. His shadow stretched over her, and when she finally opened her eyes, she found herself staring into the face of a stranger, broad-shouldered, weathered by sun and wind, but with dark eyes that held something she had almost forgotten existed. Kindness. And when she whispered, barely audible, "My ribs are already broken," something shifted in his gaze. He didn't pity her. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his voice steady as stone. I can see that Thomas Garrett didn't move closer. He stayed crouched a few feet away, as if he knew too much distance could feel like abandonment, but too little might feel like a trap. His horse snorted softly behind him, the sound calm, almost curious, as though the animal knew Clara wasn't a threat. "You've been walking a long time," Thomas said gently. His dark eyes took in her torn dress, her bare bleeding feet, the bruises peeking beneath the fabric. Clara wanted to say something back, to prove she still had her voice, but her throat only managed a rasp. Since dawn, Thomas nodded slowly, no surprise in his expression. "Name's Thomas Garrett. Don't reckon you owe me yours unless you want to give it." The choice, in his words, startled her. No one had given her choices in a long time. She clutched at the sound of her own name like it might vanish if she didn't speak it. "Clara." He repeated it softly, testing it on his tongue. "Clara. That's a good name. Strong name." She almost laughed, bitter at the idea. Strong. Her ribs were cracked, her body failing, her spirit splintered like old wood. But Thomas said it without judgment, without demand, as if he simply believed it to be true. "You're hurt bad," he said. More than just the ribs. She flinched, half expecting anger for her silence. Instead, he only waited, steady as a mountain. "Someone did this," he said finally. "Not a question. A fact." Clara's breath caught. For the first time in years, she nodded. His jaw tightened, the line of it sharp in the afternoon sun. But his voice remained even. "Are they coming after you?" Clara's lips moved, but her voice cracked into nothing. Somehow Thomas understood. He gave a small nod. "Then we best get you somewhere safe." He rose slowly, his hands empty, showing her he carried no threat. "I've got a cabin near here. Quiet. solid walls. You willing to trust me that far? Trust. The word was heavy, foreign. Trust had always turned sharp in her hands, cutting her when she dared hold it. Yet looking at him, she saw no hunger, no cruelty hiding in his gaze, just steady patience. She tried to stand, but her body betrayed her. Her legs buckled, ribs screaming in protest. "I know," Thomas murmured, as though reading her struggle. "That's all right. I've got steady hands." He stepped closer, slow as if approaching a spooked horse. "Going to help you now?" he said. She gave the barest nod. Thomas lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing, his touch careful, his strength quiet. Fire shot through her chest, but he steadied her, murmuring, "Easy now. You're all right." The horse lowered its head as Thomas brought her near. It was a big sorrel gelding, gentle-eyed, patient. Not the kind of beast a violent man would keep. "Almost there," Thomas whispered as he set her against the saddle. He mounted behind her with practiced ease, his arms bracing her without pressing, giving her space even as he held her steady. "You can lean back if you need," he said. Clara tried to stay upright, tried to prove she wasn't completely broken. But the pain carved through her with every breath, and at last she let herself rest against him. His chest was solid, his heartbeat steady, a rhythm that anchored her as the horse carried them forward. The trees closed in around them, cool shade replacing the merciless sun. For the first time since leaving the cabin, Clara's body loosened. Not in trust, not yet, but in surrender to exhaustion. "Almost there," Thomas said again, and when she opened her eyes, she saw it. A log cabin tucked in a clearing, smoke curling from its chimney, a small garden laid neat by careful hands. It didn't look like a prison. It looked like a promise. Thomas dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but his arms steadied her without force. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you inside." Quote, the door stood open, spilling warm yellow light into the dusk. Clara's heart pounded at the sight. Light had never meant safety before, but standing there, with Thomas's hand hovering near her elbow, ready if she faltered, she felt the fragile stirrings of something she thought she had lost forever. "Hope my ribs are already broken," she whispered, almost to herself. Thomas's eyes caught hers in the fading light. "Then we'll give them time to heal," he said simply. And for the first time in years, Clara stepped forward toward warmth instead of away from pain. The cabin smelled of pine and wood smoke, not of sweat and whiskey, like the house she had left behind. A quilt lay folded on a chair, stitched with colors that reminded Clara of wildflowers she had once picked as a child. Everything inside the room felt touched by gentleness. Thomas guided her to a bed near the hearth. He didn't hover, didn't crowd her, just placed a pillow behind her back and set a blanket across her lap. For a moment, Clara didn't know what to do. Her body braced for anger, for the harsh words that always followed silence. But none came. "Only the soft crackle of fire. I'll fetch some water," Thomas said. His voice carried no command, only a quiet respect, as if her presence was something fragile he didn't want to break. When he returned, he knelt and held the tin cup steady as she drank. Cool water slid down her throat, washing away dust and fear. Her eyes filled, not from pain, but from the strange mercy of it. "You're safe here," Thomas said. He didn't ask her story, not yet. He didn't demand her truth before she was ready. He just gave her the gift of silence, one that wasn't filled with judgment. Night fell. Clara drifted in and out of restless dreams, waking sometimes to the sound of Thomas moving about the cabin. Each time she opened her eyes, she saw him sitting nearby, whittling by lantern light or mending tack, his presence steady as the stars outside. By dawn, Clara woke to the smell of cornbread baking. Her ribs still ached, her feet still raw, but something inside her felt lighter. Thomas placed a plate on the table. "Eat what you can. You'll need your strength." She managed a few bites, each one carrying more comfort than any meal she'd known in years. For the first time, food didn't taste like a demand or a bargain. It tasted like care. When the silence stretched too long, Clara found her voice. "He was my brother." Quote, Thomas didn't flinch. He set his cup down slowly and nodded. "I reckoned it was someone close." "He wasn't always like that," she whispered. "But after Pa died, something broke in him. And he broke me too." Her ribs throbbed at the words, as if reminding her they carried proof. Thomas's gaze softened. "There are men who lose themselves when grief comes. But that doesn't give them the right to lay cruelty on others." Clara's throat tightened. No one had ever said it plain. No one had ever dared call what Jeremiah did cruelty. "You don't owe his darkness your life," Thomas added. Clara closed her eyes, fighting tears. She had thought leaving the cabin was the hardest part. But hearing truth spoken aloud, hearing her suffering given a name, was harder still. "Will he come for me?" she asked at last. Thomas's jaw set firm. "If he does, he'll find I don't take kindly to men who harm women. And he won't touch you again." The words were steady, not boastful. Thomas spoke them like a promise carved in stone. Something shifted deep inside Clara then. A weight she had carried for years began to lift, replaced not by certainty, but by the fragile beginnings of trust. Days passed. Clara's ribs began to mend. Her steps grew steadier. She helped in the garden when she could, her hands learning to work soil instead of scrubbing away anger. Each evening, Thomas would sit with her on the porch, the wide prairie sky opening above them. One night, as the stars lit the horizon, Clara whispered, "I don't know if I'll ever stop being afraid." Thomas looked at her, his voice quiet, but sure. "Fear may stay, but it doesn't get to rule you. You've already walked away from the worst of it." Clara held his gaze, and for the first time in years, she believed it might be true. She thought of that first moment, broken on the ground, whispering her pain. And now, sitting beneath the endless sky, she realized she wasn't whispering anymore. Her ribs would heal, her heart would heal slower, but it too would mend. Because for the first time, she wasn't alone. And in Thomas's quiet strength, Clara found the courage to believe in life beyond cruelty.